to Charter Township of Van Buren Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, March 13th of 2019. We'll start with a roll call, please.
Jeff Jar.
Here.
Don Boynton. Brian Kelly.
Here.
Medina Atchison.
Here.
Sherry Budd. Here. Joan Franzoy is excused. Carol Thompson.
Here. Thank you so much. And Commissioner Boynton is here. Great. You have an agenda before you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Kelly, support?
Support.
Commissioner Jar. Any additions or? All in favor of approving the February 13th, 2019 minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the minutes are approved. First item on tonight's agenda under new business is a preliminary site plan approval for Project Sycamore. The applicant, Julian Beglin, is requesting preliminary site plan approval for site development for a visitor and vehicle receiving center building, associated improvements, and site hardening for security purposes for a data center use. The location is 9000 Haggerty Road. Property is located on the northwest corner of Haggerty Road and Tyler Road. We'll start first with the presentation by the applicant. Good
Again,
evening. Hello.
I'm just going to put this board up. So I appreciate the opportunity to present this project to you for a second time, actually, and request the preliminary approval. Again, my name is Julian Beglin. I'm with HF Lens Company. We're the design and consultant for JP Morgan Chase. And we're providing design services for the improvements that we have before you, which essentially is for a vehicle and visitor receiving center, which is a small building, about 10,000 square feet. And that includes the roadway improvements, site security, boundary improvements for security for the entire perimeter of the site, and then drainage and associated parking. So what I'd like to do is just do a very quick overview. I think most of you were here for the previous presentation, but just to reiterate some of the changes we've made since we had made our application to Van Buren Township. We had the opportunity to sit down with the staff and go over the documents. And this was a very helpful process because we were able to identify and correct many of the deficiencies that we had, some of which were administrative and some were oversight with not being familiar with certain zoning codes and such like. So the image I have on this display board is the overall site plan, which identifies, it's also up on screen, the general scope of the project. This is a 53-acre site, and we're developing approximately 1/4 of it for the new site access. The site access will primarily change the access points for the facility. Instead of using the Haggerty Road South entrance, which is sort of like the main entrance. I can show that right on here. It's identified in the red. This is primarily where all the employees, personnel, and such like would enter the site. That access point will actually be eliminated as part of the project, and we'll move all of the traffic and all of the access up to the northeast entrance, which is right here. And the reason for doing that is we're trying to funnel and bring all of our visitors, delivery, guests, employees, personnel, techs, everybody that's going to enter this site is going to come in through a single point of access. The purpose of that is to provide 3 levels of security. That's the unsecured section, which goes up to this point right here, and then an intermediate security section, which is identified right here. And then beyond the VVRC, once someone has had their vehicle inspected, they've been verified that they're permitted to come on site, then they will proceed through into the fully secured side of the of the facility. There's a secondary security entrance located in this corner of the building. That's where there'll be some additional security requirements before entering the actual main facility, which is really what we're trying to provide the security for, is the data processing part of the facility. What we've tried to do is make the changes in compliance with the township requirements. I don't believe we have anything that's extraordinary, with the exception of a reduction in our parking counts. The facility had somewhere in the region of 650 to 700 spaces under its previous use. As we gravitate towards the final project, that will be reduced down to a mere 50 on a regular day shift. So what we have done is provided a use analysis on our cover sheet of our documents, which identifies how we've calculated the required spaces, trying to use a portion of the township's parking ordinance. So actually what that does is it provides us with a count of around 57 that we would need to provide, but based on the fact that we have an unsecured or semi-secured zone and a secured zone, we want to have enough spaces in both places to support that transient population that's going to be coming to the site. So we're currently sitting at about 139 spaces total. So that would be approximately 47 out here, and the balance of them right here and here. We are providing more than the required number of ADA or accessible barrier-free spaces, both at the visitor center and at the interior. We've also amended the parking striping to match the 9.5 by 20-foot spaces with the double line spacing. That did cut our spaces down just a fraction. So we do have a slight change in our numbers from the first go-around. And we've made some slight alterations to the plans to basically accommodate some of the questions from your zoning planning consultant and the engineer, all of which were fairly straightforward. I would like to just let you know that we have met with the county stormwater agency today. We've reviewed the documents with them from our first submission. We do have a number of changes to make in order to satisfy their requirements, but we feel we'll be doing about a 10-day turnaround on those changes and getting those back into the county for the secondary and hopefully final review, and those changes will be reflected on the documents that come back to the township after this round of review comments. So with that, I will yield and allow you guys to ask me some questions if you have any.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mr.
You're most
Beglin.
welcome.
I think what we'll do now is hear the recommendations from our planners and engineers, and then if there's questions that we need you, we'll have you come up and respond. So we'll start first with McKenna & Associates. Mr. Sloan?
Thank you. We prepared a letter dated March 8th, 2019 for the request, and the applicant did a great job of summarizing the proposed development, the structures, and the site changes. Our letter is a recommendation for preliminary site plan approval with several conditions, which I'll get into in a moment. On the first page of our letter, we go through the zoning and use, as well as required information and some of the dimensional standards of the zoning ordinance. The site is zoned M1 Light Industrial District, and the existing office and bank processing facility is to be converted to a data center, and these are permitted uses in the M1 district. So there's no requirement for a special land use or anything like that. So those uses, such as high-tech data processing and computer centers, are permitted by right in the M1 district. The site plan contains all of the required information in Article 12 of the zoning ordinance. The lot is 53.3 acres, which is far above the minimum lot size. and the proposed development meets all the dimensional requirements of the ordinance with respect to setbacks and coverage. I'm going to skip ahead to page 7 of our letter and a summary of our recommendation with the conditions, and we can always go back to the specific topics as they come up. As I previously stated, our recommendation is a recommendation of preliminary site plan approval subject to several conditions to be satisfied prior to final site plan review. Overall, there are 14 conditions, and as I go through them, most of which are going to come up as fairly minor. The first recommended condition is that the parking spaces in the new lot be angled so that the direction of circulation is clear, or that the aisles be widened to 24 feet, which is the minimum aisle width for a 90-degree space. The second recommended condition is that the pavement striping or signage be added on the outer loop of Ecorse Street and the drive aisle immediately east of the existing building, and that's more for access management and indicating which way traffic will flow. The third condition is that pursuant to section 9.101J of the zoning ordinance, and this is the section of the zoning ordinance that allows the planning commission to make parking modifications. Our recommendation is that the proposed 58 parking spaces be deemed sufficient to meet the parking requirements for the site. And we also want to note that if additional parking is needed in the future based on a future use of the site, there is sufficient area on the site to construct new parking areas. As the applicant mentioned, if there are any changes to the parking between now and final site plan review, we can readdress this condition at that time as well. In addition, if there's any change to the site or a change in employment, we can modify that item at that time. The fourth condition is that the applicant provide additional details regarding why the required trees and shrubs along Tyler Road cannot be located elsewhere on the site in lieu of the Tyler Road frontage landscaping. Along the Tyler Road frontage, there's a deficiency of 24 frontage trees, 13 ornamental trees, and 263 shrubs. The applicant had stated that due to some visibility concerns from the building to the road and vice versa, that it's generally impractical to plant trees there. And so what we recommend is that additional details be provided in terms of why those same trees and shrubs couldn't be located somewhere else on the site. The zoning ordinance allows the planning commission to modify landscape requirements without having to go and get a variance. So that is discretion that the planning commission has. We just want a little bit more information in terms of why they couldn't be located somewhere else on the site. And again, that's something that can be addressed between preliminary and final. And then at final site plan review, the planning commission can make a final determination on that waiver request. The fifth condition is that the applicant clarify which trees are being included in the landscape plan to meet the interior landscaping requirement, and much of this is just labeling. The sixth is that the height and width of the berm must be noted to demonstrate that it will provide required screening of the VVRC building from Haggerty Road, and we recommend that a cross-section diagram and a line of sight diagram be provided to ensure adequate screening. And again, if something comes up with an opening or a deficiency, that's always something that can be done by modifying the berm or including more evergreen trees. The seventh condition is that pursuant to section 10.106 of the zoning ordinance, that the landscaping of the 344 linear foot area on the south side of the eastern lot line remain as is with the existing landscaping, since the trees in this area have grown to maturity and accomplished the intended objective. And this standard is a screening objective for industrial properties. Along that part of the lot, there are several mature trees that do achieve that standard. So the applicant didn't want to cut the trees just to have to plant more. So as long as that screening is met, we recommend that that be approved. The eighth condition is that pursuant to that same section of the zoning ordinance, we recommend that the open space landscaping requirements be modified to accept the 86 existing deciduous trees and 22 additional trees proposed, which results in a shortfall of 307 trees. The applicant has stated that additional trees would impede the line of sight on the property and create a security issue considering the nature of the use on the site. The ninth condition is that the plans include provisions for irrigation and that the plans include a required statement that's noted in the zoning ordinance. The 10th is that the light fixture details be provided and included on the photometric plan. The 11th condition is that the elevations of the VVRC building be revised to provide some additional detailing, such as faux windows that are compatible with the research tech appearance of several new businesses down the corridor. And building material samples and colors should be presented to the Planning Commission meeting for review. And that's something that could be deferred to the final site plan review. The 12th condition is that the dumpster enclosure and gate details must be included in the plans, and the enclosure must meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance, which includes a masonry walls and steel reinforced wooden gates. Also, the dumpster must be located even with or behind the front line of the VVRC building. The 13th recommended condition is that the plans must clarify where the other dumpsters serving the main building are located, and if required, the existing dumpsters must be brought into compliance with the zoning ordinance. And finally, the 14th recommended condition is that all sign details must be added to the plans, especially if the sign details are known. The sign permit is an administrative function where a sign permit's granted, but if there's any signage details that are known at this time, we recommend them on the plan. So that summarizes our recommendation, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Great. Thanks so much. We'll go on to the engineering review. Mr. Kanner?
Thank you. So based on our letter that we submitted on March 7th, 2018, we are recommending preliminary plan approval for the Sycamore site. And I just want to go through a couple of the things that Mr. Beglin did not go over in terms of what's happening on the site utility-wise. Outside of the parking lots and blast wall and a few things that were discussed, they will be installing some additional storm sewer pipe networks to accommodate the new pavement around the site. There will be new sanitary lead coming off of the publicly owned sanitary main that runs near the existing building. There will be water service lead coming again from the same area along the existing building down to the VVRC. And other than that, random site improvements and landscaping around as we've seen. I'll go through some of the general comments that we have and get into any additional comments on those utilities as I go through here. As Mr. Beglin indicated, there's been some discussions with Wayne County on the stormwater management of the site, and we know that that is ongoing, and it sounds like you guys have at least gotten a letter from them. So we will discuss internally with you after you provide us with their comments, and we can discuss further if there's anything that we need to do as a township outside of those requirements from the county. As far as the water service is concerned, the service line is going to be an 8-inch water main, privately owned service from the 12-inch line that runs along the building. This will have a hydrant on it, and it will contain 2 gate valves. We are requesting that they currently show the gate valves in boxes, essentially the tubes to shut them off. Township standards are to put them in gate wells or manhole size wells so that they're more easily accessible. Other than that, we've had some discussions during the staff review about the water main going beneath the blast wall, and through some back and forth, we have come to an agreement with them casing the pipe. They're going to add end seals to the pipe so that infiltration doesn't come into the casing pipe itself, and we are okay with the direction they're going with that. As far as the sanitary sewer goes, everything along those lines is approved, but we would like to see some additional calculations to verify the size that you guys are using. I know you guys submitted the REUs that you use, but we'd just like to see some calculations based on the usage and the slope of the pipe for what they're doing at the building. Finally, this like I mentioned, the stormwater is is Wayne County based, and when we get to that, we will review it further. At this point, that is all that we have. These plans were in very good shape for preliminary, and we No, sorry. Happy to answer any questions if you guys have any.
Great, thanks so much. We also have a review from the fire marshal, Director Akers. Anything we need to note on the fire marshal's review?
I just want to highlight really quickly what the fire marshal's review is everybody was given an updated copy of the review letter at the meeting. There were a couple title changes that were incorrect, and the fire marshal wanted to make sure that that those items were corrected. So, with regards to the fire marshal's letter, there were only 4 items that they had highlighted to bring to the attention of the applicant. And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Beglin, you've spoken with Fire Marshal McAnally about all of them, correct? The 4 items that they had addressed on the letter dated March 5th were with regards to fire department access roads, providing turnaround for a fire apparatus. The access roads also have to have an unobstructed width of 20 feet. The fire marshal is requesting a Knox box at both the Haggerty and Tyler Road entrance. And then the last comment is one that we see with every one of these new proposals is with regards to the two-way radio communication enhancement systems within the buildings. So I know these items have been discussed between our fire marshal and Mr. Beglin, and they will be addressed prior to final site plan approval.
Questions or comments from the commission for the applicant or any of the reviews? Staff? Commissioner Jar?
Mr. Sloan, is there an overall reduction in the amount of paved surface due to this project? I noticed there's a whole parking lot's being torn out, correct?
Yeah, there's quite a bit on account of removing the parking lot. There will be some paved surface added in terms of the new use. I'm not sure if there's a net reduction or a net addition.
Oh, I'm not sure if there's a net reduction.
Yeah, I can
Certainly in the
speak to that.
parking.
So the net reduction is 1 acre of net reduction. So we will be pulling out, after we're all said and done, an entire acre. So that's where we don't have to make improvements to the storm pond or the 4 bays because we already have enough capacity.
Great, thanks. You can just stay up there.
Okay.
We might have something else. Anything else? Yes.
Mr. Sloan, with regard to point number 8, the shortfall on the trees, that's 307 trees, it's a 75% shortfall. It's a lot of trees that aren't going onto the site. Is there a plan to offset that through the tree fund, or what are we talking about here with these missing trees?
The only offset with something like the tree fund would be if they are replacement trees through the tree ordinance. So if somebody cuts down trees and they have to replace them, if they don't replant them on site, then there's the option for a contribution to the tree fund for the cost of the trees that they would have otherwise had to plant. As it's proposed, the trees that they're proposing to cut down, they are mitigating on the site. But in terms of there's certainly area on the site in which they can plant the trees. It's just a matter of the sight lines and physically being able to fit them on the site. And so that's why they're requesting that waiver.
And is the number of trees goes up because of the reduction in the paved surface? Is that case?
Part of it is the open space trees. The way that they're calculated on the plan is for any areas that are not built on or not otherwise accounted for in the landscaping, there's a ratio of open space trees that have to be planted within those open areas. So it'll discourage long, unpaved grass areas, large lawns, or unlandscaped areas in some cases where there's just no trees and it looks kind of barren. So it's just a way of trying to replant the site to make it look nicer.
Ron, would you be able to pull up the proposed landscaping for the entire site? It should be one that has a lot of link lines. It looks like that, but it's the whole thing. There it is. Okay. And I actually have our landscape architect here who may be able to speak more clearly on this, but effectively what we've tried to do is find a strike a happy medium between putting as many trees back on site as possible without jeopardizing security. And this project basically is a security endeavor, right? We're trying to make a site where our security personnel aren't always challenged with the ability of someone to hide, which is why we've tried to reduce the amount of evergreen trees and go with mostly deciduous that we can limb up to 5 or 6 feet so that there's really no place to hide. Same applies with, if you notice on the perimeter fencing, there's a line 25 feet either side of the fence that we need to stop. You know, we don't want to put trees in because then we have limbs that can grow up around that fence, maybe not initially, but over a period of time that would limit the cameras from being able to see clearly in each direction, and also the lighting that we're putting along that to provide our security personnel the best vantage point that they can have. So yes, I think we are looking for some relief from the planting. Having said that, I think we can be creative and put some plantings in other places. We have some areas that we're creating a more dense planting areas around the perimeter, but where we want to try and keep it open, or we have our pond space for our stormwater storage, it's very difficult to then encourage a whole lot of new plantings that become a challenge from a visibility standpoint. So sort of trying to find a happy medium between the two.
Is the 25-foot fence buffer one of the challenges you have with meeting the requirement for frontage planting along Tyler Road?
That's correct. It really does make it challenging. We've if you can see in the bottom left corner of the sheet, which is actually the southeast corner, we've tried to put a lot of smaller, I think those are mostly shrubs, and then take some other shrubs and trees across the front. But yes, we have a 50-foot pathway for that fence that really prevents us from doing any dense plantings.
And your recommendation is that we give further review to the plantings before final site approval, right?
Yeah, and that decision can be deferred to final as well. The main one that we were concerned with were the frontage trees, in terms of getting more information from the applicant, because the frontage trees tend to be a little bit more important, because as you drive down the road, just the appearance of a site, the frontage trees do so much more than a lot of other types of trees that are more interior to the site. So that was one that we especially wanted more information on, but I don't think there's any harm in deferring it.
So to offer some resolution to this, I think between now and our final submission, we'll get with the security folks and we'll look at what we can do to improve the frontage trees in particular. We are sensitive to the fact that we want to be a good neighbor and try and keep the appearance the way that the zoning ordinance is intended, and then possibly offer up some additional fee or fund donation to counteract the ones that we're not able to plant.
Thank you.
Good, sure. Commissioner Boynton.
Madam Chair. In concert with the, gotta get used to these. In concert with the discussion along with Commissioner Jar and our applicant, I guess the question that I have to staff and to our McKenna, Mr. Sloan, would be, with the little bit of background that I have in physical security, I do understand line of sight and the concerns of what we are discussing here. And I think that our applicant may have stated the phrase and what we might have to do here, which is maybe be a little creative. And what I mean by that is that instead of, or maybe in between now and the next time we come back for final, maybe the applicant, your security team, and also staff, maybe we can get a little creative as opposed to using trees or shrubs or plantings of that nature, which can be a bit restrictive, for lack of a better word, for a security standpoint. Maybe we could find a happy medium where if it's not a tree or a shrub, maybe we can make the area look nice, just make it look pretty, make it look eye appealing, with different types of plantings spread out so that we don't have the concern of someone possibly sneaking up on the facility, which I have read about, in some publications, as well as being able to maintain the requirements of the ordinance, or at least being consistent, whereas we're still holding the applicant to abide by what we have set forth, given the unique nature of what they will be doing at the facility. Is that a doable thing?
I think based on that and what the applicant said, I think there is a way to make it work.
Yeah.
When we get input from the security personnel in terms of what's possible, and to see what can be done out there. If not trees, what else can be done to make it look nicer?
Mhm.
And the modifications are unique to landscaping. It's a section in the landscaping article that, in most cases, if something doesn't meet the zoning ordinance, it has to go to the zoning board of appeals. But in terms of landscaping, that authority is with the planning commission as a modification, not a variance. So the ordinance does consider there are cases when landscaping might not be practical, in which case it can be modified, meaning that maybe not entirely waived, but there could be some other standard in lieu of that.
Outstanding.
To the chair, I would agree with that, Mr. Boynton, and that I think we should definitely look at that maybe before it comes back to us again. If staff, excuse me, staff and you were to review it, because I certainly wouldn't want to hold them to trees that are going to make it more difficult for them.
Okay.
Other questions or comments?
Particularly when
commissioners?
they've increased the amount of open space on the property.
Like that. Anyone in the audience, questions or comments? Okay. I would just like to say that we have enjoyed a very attractive site already with Chase there. They've done an excellent job in the past, and it's been nice to have them in that industrial corridor because of the green space that they have. So that said, and I appreciate what you're wrestling with to try and bring in the project that you need, I wonder if we need to call out in our final approval, either on the plans or in the letter, why we are making some of these accommodations for security issues, so that we don't have other applicants that don't have the same security issues that are then asking for similar remedy. Sure, Director Akers.
And I think what might be an idea is we've requested additional information from the applicant, from the security consultants, and it sounded like a letter was going to be provided, and we can certainly, when we go to final site plan approval, reference that letter and make sure it's added into the record. The last item I wanted to bring up, and I apologize if it was said before because I didn't hear it, but the applicant did receive a variance last night for the retaining wall that they have up front. So they did get a variance from the BZA.
Great. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That's a tough crowd. Okay.
They were great, though.
I wondered if you had a response at this point on the request for irrigation.
Yeah, actually, we were speaking about that before the meeting. So we've selected species that are hardy and that do well in an arid condition. Addition to that, the requirement in the contract is that the subcontractor that gets the planting will own those plants for one period of 1 year. So it's really up to them to provide us with, there are some options that they can use depending on what time of the year that they're planted, with some temporary irrigation bags that basically are filled and seep to provide that root ball a good start And once it's taken, if it dies within that 12 months, then they come back and replace it, monitor it for additional 12 months. So at that point, we should have, after a 12-month period, a well-established set of plantings, and then we will have on the documents the notes that to meet the zoning requirements for anything that dies beyond that, that's taken out, removed, and replaced.
Good, thank you. So I want to ask the commission if there are any concerns or further discussion on the parking, since when we come back to final, things are going to be pretty well set in terms of that number and how they've managed the location. Does anybody have anything?
Just to comment, I don't have a problem with waiving the parking to what they want, because they definitely, if it proves that they need it, they definitely have the space to provide it. So I don't have a problem letting that go.
Anybody?
Good.
Okay.
The waiving the number is good. The layout of the parking in front of the visitor center, I did agree with our consultants who said that it was kind of a strange looking flow with the straight parking spaces, and the entrance to the lot being at the northwest corner and the exit being at the southeast. Have you considered rerouting any of the traffic flow in that lot to make it more, well, to ease the flow?
So maybe I can elaborate slightly on the methodology behind it. We actually verified, when I read the comment, we did verify a 24-foot aisle. If it's not represented on this drawing, it will be represented that way on the final submission. These have been a work in progress, and we get them as far along as we can and we submit, and then we continue to work on them. So there may be some changes beyond what you're seeing right here. This actually does not reflect the changes that we most recently made, because the background that our landscape architect is using was the previous submission. So the new line striping actually does reflect a 24-foot aisle, both on the interior. These are 24-foot two-way aisles, and this is actually this is 31.
Technology.
Yeah, you gotta love it, right? So other than the arrows basically suggesting the flow to get out to the exit, we do have signage that says this is exit only with an arrow coming this way. But basically you could navigate around the parking lot till you find a space, which I don't think is going to be an issue. But these are 24-foot aisles. This is a 31-foot aisle. And it's designed pretty much that anyone coming in, they find a first space, go into the building, and when they come out to leave, they leave this way, because it's a one-way flow. The idea being that once you've come through a gate, you don't go back through it in the other direction. It's to make sure that we have these limiting areas as someone leaves, that we cannot have someone sneak back past them and get back into the facility. So this is the same basic model that has been used at other sites throughout the U.S. So they are trying to standardize their approach. We've definitely site modified it for Belleville. That's why the layout is as such. And actually, the size of this is about all we could squeeze into the space from this entry point to where we end up over here. So although it's an immense site, it's very quickly eaten up by the components of the land development.
Okay. Good. So we're okay then on parking. The only other thing I had outstanding to get your input on is if you've considered other details to the elevation of the building to keep us from that long expanse of solid wall.
For the VVRC, okay, yeah, I talked to the architect right before the meeting, actually. It's hard to do windows in a building that is very specifically designed for basically it's a dock processing center. So what we're willing to do, and I think this would be reflected in the main building, is we're taking out windows in the ground floor of the main building for the hardening. So these windows you see here are actually the same on the bottom. And so what we're going to do is take those out and use a contrasting brick infill so that you get the effect of a contrast. It'll be inset. It's not just a flat surface, all one color. So we would be willing to do the same thing with the VVRC and create some three-dimension and some contrasting colors to kind of break it up. We try and avoid glazing as such, but would definitely be willing to be a bit more creative on that, on this face, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think that hits us pretty well on the ordinance, right, Mr. Sloan? Okay.
Definitely a huge step in the right direction. So when those are done, we'll look at them, and there's not really an architectural standard. It's just a matter of trying to make it look nicer. So, anything that can be done to help break up the building a little bit would be good.
This would probably be a good time to tell you that the last version of architectural renderings and architectural drawings, that blue stripe is going to be a gray stripe. The blue is something that's going to go because they want to try and tone down the blue connectivity with the name. So it's going to be sort of a gray or a beige contrasting stripe, and the same thing's going to be applied at the building.
Okay, we look forward to seeing it then. Any other questions or comments? Oh, sorry, one more. This is really just internally for us because we're really learning as we go on the security uses that we haven't had to deal with before. Are there different approaches, or is there discussion happening with the fire marshal and or police so that their security concerns internally are also, that we're aware public safety wise and that they've figured out their communication?
So the application, is reviewed by the fire marshal, and they do walkthroughs of the site. They are working with Mr. Beglin and the company with regards to providing security access on site. They actually, because a lot of the infrastructure is already in place, they do have emergency response plans on site in areas where they access. From what my understanding is, the primary emergency access will be off Tyler Road. They'll have a Knox box and they'll be able to get through that gate and access the building from either side. So yes, they are, in short, yes, they're working with them. They're aware of everything that's going on.
Great. Well, it's a learning curve for all of us.
Ironically, we met with the fire marshal this morning, and he toured the actual construction site, so he's aware of what's going on, and we try to keep him involved through the whole process, both for knowledge of the site, should we have an incident during construction, or when we get to the end and he's doing inspections, he's seen the process and is well aware. So he's definitely on board. We're working with him hand in hand on both the access and the repeater system and such like.
Great. All right, all good. I'd say very good job
Okay, thank
to
you.
the staff and to your people for getting us to this point. So if there are no other questions or comments, is there a motion for preliminary approval?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Kelly?
I'd move to grant the applicant preliminary site plan approval for the construction of a visitor center and receiving center and associated improvements for the site located at 9,000 Haggerty Road. Based on the analysis and subject to the conditions detailed in the Van Buren Fire Department letter dated March 5th, 2019, the McKenna letter dated March 8th, 2019, and the Fishbeck letter dated March 7th, 2019.
Great. Is there support?
Support.
Support from Commissioner Boynton. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. All right, back to work. And good job so far. We look forward to seeing you back for final. Okay. Next item on tonight's agenda. This is continuing under general discussion, our senior housing development options. And we have some responses from McKenna and Associates to some of the issues that we brought up at the last discussion for this. So, Mr. Sloan, I'll have you walk through it, but this is general discussion, so if we need to stop and kick it around a little bit, or there are some questions or some comments, then we'll just take time and do that. But you want to take the lead, please?
Thank you. Yes, that's correct. And as you said, it's just a general discussion item. So anything along the way, feel free to jump in. And I'll try to be as brief as I can on this topic so that we have enough time to discuss. And I'm going to go off of our letter of March 7th. And it's just a short recap from our February 13th meeting where we discussed proposed regulations for multifamily residential. And that discussion revolved mostly around any proposed regulations for additional senior housing options. And so what we wanted to do was first, on the first page of our letter, give a little bit of an introduction in terms of where the zoning ordinance used to be in terms of senior housing. And the reason for that is because the previous zoning ordinance had what were called planned senior developments. And they were regulations that were adopted in 1999 as part of the planned residential development regulations. At that time, they were written because I think there was an interested developer and the standards were tailored to allow the type of use. However, there was not a development done for a planned senior development. So since they were adopted in 1999, there had been no developments. And so that part of the zoning ordinance was not continued when the current zoning ordinance was adopted. But just to recap some of the provisions of the planned senior developments, and some of these provisions are similar to other provisions in ordinances that have senior housing regulations. They did have regulations for the zoning districts and the lot area and frontage. And then there were also some unique location requirements for planned senior developments. But the standards for the permitted uses in a planned senior development, as well as the densities, were pretty standard for a lot of senior housing standards that are out there. For ordinances that regulate senior housing based on independent living and different levels of dependent living, some of the dwelling units per acre or rooms per acre that were in the planned senior development regulations were pretty standard in a lot of other ordinances. So if this was something that the township wanted to readopt into its ordinance as just general senior housing regulations, if they were, for example, permitted in multifamily or special land use in other districts, these are pretty good density standards and design standards that are pretty good. So I'll jump from the past regulations into the last page of our letter on page 3 and 4. Mainly on page 3, we included a few items on the subject of accessory dwelling units. And there are a lot of names for accessory dwelling units. Some of them are called family suites or an in-law apartment or something else that's very similar to the use. And there are a lot of topics that go along with what an accessory dwelling unit would be. And in general, an accessory dwelling unit is having a second dwelling on a piece of property. So right now, the zoning ordinance prohibits more than one single-family residence on a lot. So if you want to build two single-family residences, you need 2 lots. With an accessory dwelling unit, in general, that's a second dwelling unit on the same lot, but usually there are some additional restrictions in zoning. And some of the restrictions could be that they might have to be attached to the principal structure, or they may be limited in the number of square feet, or there could be a limitation on requiring that it only be occupied by a member of the family of the property owner. And communities that regulate accessory dwelling units all do it differently. There's a lot of different options. Some communities don't want to distinguish between who lives there. They just want to allow for more options for affordable housing. So some of them in some communities are permitted by right as a way of increasing density without having to increase a lot of new units, especially for people that may not want to have a lot of square footage and just want to be able to rent a small place. It's a good option. As we commonly know them, a lot of times people, if they have a grandparent or a parent who's elderly and they want to live with them and they want to create a separate place for them, a lot of times in many communities, people want to explore options for doing that. And so on page 3, we list a number of different topics, and I won't go through each one of them. I'll just call out a couple of the main ones that come up in terms of if we were to explore regulations for accessory dwelling units, some of the topics we would consider. And in here, there's no recommendation in terms of which way you should go or shouldn't go, just because a lot of them are options and are worth discussing before moving forward. And a lot of times it just depends on what the priorities of a community are in terms of what they want to do with housing. And then once they have the general priorities, some of these fall into place. So some of the main things that come up are which zoning districts you might allow them in. And if you do, whether to make them permitted uses or special land uses. Having a special land use for an accessory dwelling unit, there would be a lot more assurance that they'd be meeting the standards, a lot more scrutiny to make sure it's not something that the ordinance doesn't allow. But it does add a few months to the process, and it may add a little bit of cost if the applicant has to prepare a site plan or a survey. Some of the other items are if the occupancy will be restricted to family members, and if so, how we would enforce that, whether they would be required to record something in the chain of title or have some other requirement like an annual inspection just to make sure that it's not being used as a rental if you were restricting it just to family members. There's also issues with whether to have an annual certification or annual inspections just to make sure it's meeting different codes and that it hasn't expanded to like a duplex type of use. And then one of the last things that I'll mention here is whether to allow detached or attached. Some ordinances require them to be attached to the principal building and put on the rear so that when you drive by the house, it doesn't look like you have one. Other ordinances don't distinguish and allow you to have it in, say, upstairs of a detached garage, where there's a little bit more flexibility in location. So with that, I'll just I'll end it at there and take any questions or comments. I know I've put a lot of information in front of you, and it's probably more than maybe we expected to have after the February 13th meeting. But generally, I just wanted to put some ideas out there to get some discussion on some of the topics and see where we go with it. So I'll leave it there and take any comments or questions.
Thanks, Patrick. It's thought-provoking, I thought, going through just the 15 different items. Just for me, raised a lot more questions than direction. I guess one of the questions before us, before we send Patrick to collecting more material to bring back to us, is are we interested in terms of senior housing in developing something for, we'll call it accessory dwelling unit for now. I don't know if that's what we'll end up calling it. So our direction is yes. Is this something we want, or we're not sure, or?
You said it very, very well. Like looking at these points, number 7, the family member occupancy only, the certification, detached or not detached, permitted use, all of that, you know, whether we're going to inspect or not. I feel like those 4 items are very like old practices that are done in cities like Lincoln Park, Wyandotte, Allen Park, in places that are very well developed and people are, it's a very developed area. Van Buren Township is not. And I feel like what I was looking for from McKenna was that we identify areas that we could hopefully attract a developer to build a senior living facility. Many times in this community, you hear people talking about us being a premier community. A premier community would have housing for everybody, not just young, middle-aged. We'd have housing. And as far as I know, we don't have any senior living facilities, correct?
I'm not sure if we...
I don't know of any.
We do have a handful. We have a couple homes, so there's they call them state licensed residential facilities and group homes. They're licensed by the state of Michigan. A lot of times they're single family homes, which they're renting individual rooms. We do have a handful of those in the township, and I believe there's one adult care facility in the township. But I'm not sure what they specialize in.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple on the service drug, I'm sorry, through chair.
It's discussion.
I don't consider group homes the same thing as a senior living facility. I think somebody who's going to a group home could never live in a senior living facility. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but that's the way I look at it. I see a lot of people every day in our community, I interface with them every day, and I hear a lot about them moving. Many times they're moving to Canton. They want to downsize their home, and they're leaving our community because, and I should come out and ask them. Maybe I could start taking a poll, but I have enough to do. I would like to consider us a premier community, but that means we'd have to have housing for everybody. Yes, the group homes. Yes, the single family developments. Yes, the condos, but also a facility that people would say, hey, maybe someday I'll be living there, you know? I'm thinking about the future myself. That's the direction I personally was looking for.
So you're more interested in a multiple residential dwelling than how people might solve it with an additional dwelling on their own property.
Right.
I think the question before us is, are we interested in pursuing both, at least looking at them? Or, I mean, if we're not going to do a dwelling on your own property, there's really no point in starting to wrestle with some pretty intense issues and having McKenna and Associates bring back documentation for us to then write ordinance. If we just are looking at where we can change the existing zoning ordinance to encourage the types of development that you're talking about, then that's a good direction to go. But if we're going to go the full route, then I think we need to not necessarily decide tonight, but at least say what more information we need to look at to make a consideration to do all and not just some, I think is the question. Is that fair?
Basically, to do all and not just some. Looking at the area that we have, I believe that the possibility of looking down the road of doing what Commissioner Atchison is advocating, and also not leaving out the other residents that are here that may have substantial size properties, may have substantial families, and may want to have the option available to them of constructing something on the property to whereas the family is pretty much still together. So we would definitely have to take and put together a basis or foundation of what they would need to follow in that respect.
That's pretty much our consensus. Try and solve, or try and make all possibilities available in the township. So we're also then talking about in terms of residential structures, we're probably talking about low income as well as other incomes. We're looking at what Mission HUD would require as well as what a developer for a higher end living space might bring in. And we're probably also then looking for memory care, and I mean, I'm getting far afield in what I know, which isn't very much, but for other types of health care living than what we have available now. So it becomes much more comprehensive, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, it runs the gamut from independent living, where it looks like a multifamily structure, and a lot of the residents there even have vehicles. They come and go as if it's an apartment building. And then, like you said, the other end of the spectrum could be memory care, where there's staff there to oversee the residents, and just about everything in between.
All right. So do we have? That's a big direction for you to go already, but do we have input on any of the accessory dwelling unit questions? Or do we, if we don't have direction, then is there more information that we need that we can ask Patrick and staff to bring back to us to help begin to define that?
Do you get a lot of requests for ADUs?
We don't get a lot of requests. The times where we've seen them occur in the township is, for lack of a better way of saying it, normally somebody has a existing accessory building that they convert without permits is normally what we see, because we currently don't allow that. It has happened more than a handful of times. It is something that we've seen a handful of questions about, but not a ton. I know the Planning Commission discussed it about a year and a half ago, actually. We were working with our prior intern, Mr. Madigan, and we had looked at some information there, but it had kind of fallen off when he left. But I know one of the items that we had looked at specifically was attached versus detached was one of the conversations that we had, and part of that conversation is, how financing would work on the property if somebody tried to sell a home and it had essentially a smaller second dwelling unit on it. And the comment that came out was that there could be some challenges with financing if somebody wanted to get a mortgage on the home because of that. So I know, at the time before Chris left, we were looking at, the possibility of attached ADUs and what they would look like, how big they would be, whether or not we could require people to do the entrances to be senior compliant at grade, that type of stuff. But that's where it ended.
I'm surprised that you don't have a provision on your list for temporary ADUs. That's bringing the park model in and parking it behind the house on a slab for, a handful of years with the intention that it won't ever be a permanent part of the buildings on the property. We used to see that a lot out west. I had family in one. Might be something to consider when you're looking at ADU regulations. There's certainly property south of the freeway.
Tiny homes?
Big, tiny homes, yeah, tiny
Okay.
homes. Park models, small trailers. They're kind of nice. Especially for this purpose. And I know that south of the freeways certainly have enough space on some of the lots to be able to support one of those. And then but that it's temporary, right? The idea is that it's a temporary use, something to consider with your ADUs.
I have a lot of questions on the temporary use, not only of the tiny home and how you handle infrastructure and sanitary sewer and stormwater and some of those key issues, water, and so it becomes much bigger than zoning. But I also have not heard that the legislature has completely dropped the idea of short-term rentals and allowing them statewide. So I'm concerned that if we pass something like this, that all of a sudden we are now open for short-term rentals all over Van Buren Township without having the ability to completely regulate it the way we would prefer, to make it make sense for the residents who are already here. So I have that caution as we go forward, because I'm not sure how much we can regulate legally, and I'm not sure how easy it will be to make some of those regulations stick. I think it's very hard to legally define family. I think it'll be very hard to legally define a short-term use. And if it is in a separate structure and for some reason it's no longer being used by the approved family member, what's to keep it from being used by whoever they can rent it to? And for me, that weighs heavily on whether it's a permitted or a special land use, because now you're really impacting the neighborhood. And I'm not attempting to be negative or shoot it down. I just have all of these questions as I read through Patrick's letter going, well, what happens if this happens? What happens about that? And I'm not sure that this is an answer to the senior housing for us at this point. I think we should explore it and see what's been successful in some other communities, and certainly keep an eye on what happens with the state legislature. But
It's good for a certain class of property owners. If you have the property and you have the space to be able to bring your parents' say in, that's wonderful. I mean, that's great if you can do it.
right.
Not everyone in our community is in that position. There are some people whose children have unfortunately moved out of the community, and they want to stay. And like my colleague said, there's not a lot of options if you just want to downsize your existing home and move into a facility with other like-minded seniors and and still continue to enjoy living in the township. And I think that's a direction that I'd like to see us move in. I would like to explore that more. These ADUs are great, it's wonderful, but I was hoping we'd talk more about the senior living facilities for people who want to maybe get out of their property but still stay in the community.
Right. Page number 3, and you said it best, Chairwoman Thompson.
Page number 3 looks like a lot of work to me, a lot of regulation, a lot of work that would be put on the township. I think it's number 3 where that's the direction I thought we were going in, where we were going to identify property and make it like a senior, like say, hey, please come developers, come to Van Buren Township and develop this multi-unit facility. They would have to regulate it. They would know who the residents are that are coming in and who the residents are that are moving. And we basically just have the development there for people to move into, to downsize and stay within the community, stay committed to their commitments here, their churches, their organizations, their families that are here instead of traveling out of the community.
And I had some questions about that too, because I don't understand or know enough about that type of development and business. So when we're looking at, and on the table, when we're looking at the number of rooms per acre, and we're saying potentially 3 to 5 acres, we're talking 60 to 100 rooms or units living. And how are those, how do those developers make their money? And what's kind of their formula? I don't understand any of that to know if, when we're saying 3 to 5 acres, are we being arbitrary for what might be available for us, or are we actually creating a site that is going to attract the type of developer that we're talking about? Just don't know enough. And maybe other communities have already
Figured it out.
yeah, have this and right and have successful developments and you know, we'll just look at what their regulations and their zoning allows and then be able to replicate that. But I don't have any understanding at all of how they do their business. Just like I didn't have any understanding about the data center. I mean, some of the other people that come before us, we've learned over time kind of, you know, how they run their business and what they need and how we can support that. But this one, I don't know.
Through the chair. I think, I mean, we drive through Canton enough times, and I know if you go up Denton Road, just a little north of Michigan Avenue, they call it a retirement center, but it looks like individual homes on lots. They've got an attached garage, they've got a little balcony, but they're one-story structures, which I think most people want to get into if they're getting rid of, they don't want stairs. And that looks like a nice community, and it's sold, and it looks like when you drive through it, they're kind of the same. The houses look different, and that's pleasant. I also have a friend who's in a memory care unit in Canton, but connected to that is an independent living section. The building has, I don't know how many, I think it's got 3 floors. It's at Cherry Hill and Lily. I don't know how many rooms there are there, but they have 2-bedroom units, they have 1-bedroom units, and they have limited services depending on what you need. And like where my friend is, she's kind of in an independent, she's not independent, but she like still has her own little like apartment. And then from there she can move in if she needs more care, where it would definitely go definite to memory care. But they seem to have done a pretty good job of putting that in with residential areas. And I mean, maybe someday we could take a road trip, go see some of these places.
So I suppose my question would then be, Patrick, what can we do to attract that type of development as planning commissioners? That's the question that I have. Is what can we do? I think we want that type of development in the community. How can we encourage it as planning commissioners?
We can pull examples from communities that have it in terms of regulations that have been successful and present those ordinance and show how their senior housing has been developed. I can reach out to senior housing developers and just ask them, you know, what kinds of things that they look for in a community, you know, beyond the regulations. I'm sure they have market studies and different pro formas that they have when they locate. I can reach out to them just to see what their thoughts are in terms of things that they look for when they look for a community.
Through the chair, I know it's open discussion, but I feel like I have to say that. I feel like it's way overdue. There's there's I don't know why we don't have it, why we haven't had it, why it hasn't been on the radar, say 20 years ago. So I just feel like it's overdue. You know, to be truly a premier community, like I said, we have to have housing for everybody. I rest my case.
I think we heard you. All right, so I guess we'll see some examples and some research back the next time we have this on the agenda, and then hopefully have a clearer path to how to go forward and make it available and then try and attract it. Okay. Anybody, anything else? Mrs. Otzman, anything? Okay. All right, anything else for general discussion? Mr. Director Akers, anything?
I guess I can give you a preview of what's coming at the next meeting and give you a quick update of maybe something that the BZA asked me to forward to the Planning Commission to look into. So at the next meeting, we're going to have a couple of rezoning requests off of Martinsville Road. They are currently, it's a single family properties. The property has a single family use, but they're currently zoned light industrial. They're master planned for single family. So we'll be seeing those, have public hearings next week. There is a fireworks temporary land use permit, and there's also an application from DTE to do some lighting configuration changes on their site on Haggerty Road. So we'll be seeing those next in 2 weeks. Regarding the BZA did ask last night that I look at the current setbacks that we require for some of the narrower lots that we have on the lake. Look at some of the existing zoning requirements, existing setbacks and building envelopes, and bring it back to the Planning Commission for consideration. So that will likely be before you in early April, is what I'm going to assume. So that's just a preview of a couple things to come.
Great. Okay. All right, if there's nothing else, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Commissioner Boynton, support.
Support.
Commissioner Kelly, was that you? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you, we're adjourned. Good work, everyone.
Yes, no.